Hello everyone and welcome to the finals of the 2021 FIDE World Cup, but not really. This is actually the clash for the third place between Vladimir Fedoseev and Magnus Carlsen. The clash for first place between Sergei Karyakin and young Krzysztof Duda. For those of you who do not wish to learn the result of that game, skip some 10 seconds now. But it ended in a draw, and it was a really quick one. There wasn't really much to show there, so we're skipping straight to this one, which has a lot more action, as the title suggests. So without further ado, let's check it out and see what Vladimir was able to do with the white pieces against the world champion. So let's check it out. We have d4. Magnus replies with knight to f6, c4, g6, and now, as Magnus is ready to go for the King's Indian defense, he wants to avoid any well-analyzed line, so he goes for h4, and this is nothing new. In 2021, this is perfectly normal to advance your flank pawn as soon as the opponent plays something like g6 or b6. We have bishop to g7 by Magnus, knight to c3, and now d6. We have e4, grabbing here the entire center, knight to c6 by Magnus, and d5 now, challenging the knight to e5, and bishop to e2. And here, so there are some moves that exist in this position. c6, a very often played move, but Magnus doesn't want to allow h5 at any point. Bishop to e2 has been played, so white gained control of the h5 square, so h5 might be played, so he plays h5 himself, and it is now, as of move 7, that we have a completely new game, so very interesting. Let's see what happened. We have bishop to f4 by Vladimir, and now castles by Magnus. We have knight to f3, and Magnus trades here. We have knight captures on f3, but now not capturing with the bishop. You could do this, but g captures on f3 is kind of a classier way to play. You gain this massive center, and now you have the g file to use for attacking purposes if Magnus allows it. Also, maybe moves like queen to d2, bishop to h6, trading of the dark square bishops are possible at some point. So here, c6 by Magnus, he undermines the center now, and queen to d2, preparing this bishop to h6 move. So first Magnus plays c captures on d5, c captures, and now Magnus wants to shift this knight over to c5, for example, to put more pressure on the center and open up this dark square bishop's diagonal, but he doesn't want to allow bishop to h6. So first king to h7. It's a very important move to play. And now a4 by Vladimir, grabbing more space here on the queen side. We have knight to d7 by Magnus. Now the knight can come to c5, and now a5. So white grabs more space on the queen side. And the king is still on e1, so you're not castling king side, you're not castling queen side. What can you do here? Well, Magnus will definitely try to attack this white king, but if he shifts all of his attention to the queen side or the center of the board, then white might be even able to castle at some point in the game, as long as the rook or the king don't move. So here you have to decide whether you want to go knight to c5. Do you want to maybe challenge this structure with b6? But Magnus chooses the f5 move to challenge this very strong central structure. So f5, and now if you go after this pawn, for example, he captures on f5, rook captures. It's actually a pretty good position for black. Point being, if you play something like bishop d3, you challenge the rook, knight to e5, and now it's just a better position for black. Knight to f3 check is already a threat of winning the white queen. If you capture with the bishop, then rook captures with check, so black is perfectly fine here. So instead, after this f5 move, we have rook to a3 by Fedoseev, and now comes knight to e5. So an excellent square for this knight, and now comes, you could play a lot of things here, like you could bring the rook to g1, maybe put some pressure on the g file, or maybe play bishop back to g3 or something. But here we have bishop to e3, but now the position is a really tricky one, and there is one move that gives black a tiny advantage, but it's such an awesome move that I really want you to pause the video here and try to find this idea while I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations, as there are many good moves here for black there, but there is only one that is this good. And congratulations to everyone who found it. The move is f4. The idea is now that black wants to continue development with bishop to d7, then bring the rest of his pieces into the game. But he doesn't want to allow white to play this f4 move. For example, if you play bishop to d7, white will play f4, you could play knight to g4, then bishop to d4. You counter black's bishop here, and white is perfectly fine here. By playing what Magnus played, f4 here, you're giving up a pawn, but you're really hindering white's development, and this is going to do wonders for black's position, as you'll see in the game. So bishop captures on f4, there's really nothing better. Bishop to d4 now just allows this beautiful pawn to stay on f4, so bishop captures on f4, bishop to d7, and now what do you play here? Well, if you go back now, bishop to e3 with the same idea, we can just play rook captures on f3, and bishop captures, knight captures, wins the queen. So not an option. So here we have knight to d1. Now the rook also helps out with the defense of the third rank, but now rook captures on f4. Magnus gladly gives up the exchange here, as this dark square bishop was one of the few white's active pieces. So queen captures on f4, now comes bishop to h6, grabbing hold of this diagonal and forcing the white queen basically in exile, as you'll see. So queen to g3, now comes queen to f8, putting more pressure here along the f-file, and also preparing this rook to come to c8 and then c1. So here knight to e3, and now comes bishop to f4, pushing the black queen even further. Not a lot of squares for this black queen, for the white queen. Queen to g2, and now rook to c8. So for this beautiful f4 pawn sacrifice and for the exchange sacrifice, Magnus got all this activity where white doesn't appear to have a playable move. Now you could consider something like king to d2, maybe try to activate your rook this way, but it's not an easy move to make. So here we have rook to c3, countering Carlsen's rook on c8. Magnus trades here, captures because white does not have a lot of active pieces, so eliminating one active piece makes white's position even worse. So here queen to c8, this is how Magnus now activates the queen, and now c4. The pawn is very nicely protected here, but now all that is needed is to bust open the queen side, and this is what Magnus does. We have b5 now, threatening to pick up the pawn here, but also just pushing here might also be nice. So a captures on b6 en passant, a captures on b6, and now white has to decide what to do, and it's not an easy decision to make. You could make a lot of interesting moves like king to f1, king to g1, maybe try queen to f1. You could try castling right away, but this requires you to give back material. If you castle right away, bishop to h3, you have to give back the rook, and then, well, it's probably still black who's better, but if you don't find anything better, maybe it's worth considering. But instead, after this a captures on b6, Fedoseev just played queen to g1. Sort of a waiting move here. Maybe now you can play king to f1, king to g2, and then maybe activate the queen and the rook. But now comes queen to a8. We have king to f1, and now the move that completely stops all of white's ideas is queen to a2. Now the king cannot move, the bishop on e2 would hang. So what do you play here? We have knight to g2 now, pressuring the bishop here. Now queen to a1 with check. Knight has to go back, otherwise you're going to lose the bishop here. So knight to e1, now comes queen to b2. Again, getting the queen a little bit closer with the same idea. The king now cannot move. Knight back to g2, now comes queen to c1 with check. Knight to e1, and now queen to d2. So using a bit of zigzagging tactic to get the queen all the way to d2. And now again, if the king moves, the bishop falls. So what can you play here? The problem is knight to g2 no longer exists as a move, because if you play knight to g2, then comes the greatest move in the game that was never played, because knight to g2 was never played. But feel free to pause the video here and try to figure this out, because it's really it's like the ultimate Zugzwang while I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on figuring out why knight to g2 here was not possible. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, it's knight to d3. And now there's nothing for white to do here. There's no move. There is literally no move that you can make here other than, just move that gives away an entire piece. Let's say this, or let's say this, or, there's no move you can make here. And well, okay, there are some moves, but all of them lose like terribly. Like if you move the knight to e3, we just play queen to e1 check, and after king to g2, we just play queen captures on e2. So you blunder an entire piece here. And other than moving the knight, you could maybe capture this knight. That's also an option. But if you capture the knight, Then queen captures on d3 with check, king to e1, and now we deliver a very nice double bishop checkmate. So bishop d2 check, king to d1, and the bishop to a4 will be checkmate. So amazing stuff here, and this is why, if you guys were wondering, after queen to d2, knight to g2 is no longer possible. So everything would lose, but congratulations to those of you who were able to solve this hypothetical position. So queen to g2, Fedoseev now forced to repeat moves with the queen and play some useless moves with king to g7. Magnus wants to improve the position of the king a little bit, even though he could strike in the center immediately with e6. We have rook to g1, putting some pressure on g6, but it's not a problem as long as the knight covers this square. King to f8, queen back to h1, no moves whatever whatsoever for white here, and now e6. Finally, Magnus goes for this. The idea is, of course, just captures, and then getting a nice pass pawn, or captures, and then you will be, you will have a very weak c4 pawn here by white, and it's going to be very easy to pick it up, and then again promote the b pawn into a queen because white has no active pieces. So here you could capture, it's not a problem, but here we have rook to g3. Here Fedoseev tries giving up the exchange here, but Magnus not interested. Magnus just continues with e captures on d5. There's no reason to give an active piece for an inactive rook. So e captures on d5, and not, of course, not c captures, and then allowing this pawn to start marching forward. And now we have bishop to f5. So with the very solid control of the d3 square, the bishop now controls it, the knight controls it, and we can play some like queen to c1, then threaten knight d3 going after the knight here, and it's gonna be over very quickly. So here Fedoseev, without a move in sight, rook back to g1, king to f7. We have rook back to g3, now comes knight to d7. Now Magnus is shifting the knight over a little bit to get a more, precise position, if you will. We have rook to g5. Fedoseev now really trying to give up this rook, but now Magnus says, okay, now you're just being silly, now I'm gonna capture it. So bishop captures on g5, h captures. Here Magnus played knight to e5, and it was in this position on move 41 that Vladimir Fedoseev resigned the game, as there is nothing more to be done here. So really a spectacular game of such a middle game Zugzwang that I was not expecting this, but ever since that f4 move that all of you found that Magnus played, just to get that one tempo in, good things just started happening. So yeah, here you resign. There is no defending the position. Let's say you try knight to g2. There are no moves you can play. Knight g2. We're just gonna play bishop to d3, and that's it. There's no defending this. If bishop captures, you just play queen captures, and wherever the king goes, knight captures on f3 is just checkmate. So there's no defending this. And if you try a bit of a more resilient approach, you might try queen to g2, just waiting. Then we play queen to c1. We just pin the knight here, and after, let's say, a waiting move, knight to d3 again, now threatening to just win the game. If bishop captures, we're gonna play bishop captures on d3 with check. King has to move. Now we're gonna pick up the g5 pawn. King has to move. Now we're gonna pick up the c4 pawn, then this pawn, and there's simply no playing this for white. Of course, Vladimir knows this, and after knight to e5, he resigned the game. But what a spectacular idea after 95, this bishop to e3. He totally wanted to play this f4 move, but Magnus just stopped it. He played f4, gave up a pawn, and this is how you sometimes have to play. If everything is about that one tempo, you just have to make it, and then none of your opponent's ideas will be possible. He will be tied down for the entire game, and also maybe something that you can use in your own game. So really awesome stuff for Magnus. We'll see what Vladimir will be able to do in the next classical game with the black pieces. Will he be able to equalize? And of course, we are returning to the Duda versus Karyakin match, as the second game is probably going to be a bit more interesting with Duda having the white pieces. No doubt he would very much enjoy ending this in the classical time format. So yeah, that's the game. Hope you guys enjoyed it. I would like to thank Jeffrey Johnson, David Kimura, Tom Derolo, Alexander Trebus, and Brendan Fukuda for a contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing the coverage of the FIDE World Cup, checking up on your wonderful suggestions and whatever else happens in the chess world. Thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.